Hello everyone, my name is Lincoln Mullen. I'm a historian of American religion at George Mason University, and I'm also one of the faculty directors at the Roy Rosenzweig Center for History and New Media. I want to thank the conference organizers for the invitation to speak to you all today. I'm going to be speaking primarily about the American Religious Ecologies project at CH&M, but also about our DataScribe project. If you all were a group of American religious historians, I would of course focus primarily on the historical interpretations that we are coming up with out of this project. But given that this is a group of digital historians, I'm going to primarily focus on the means rather than the ends, talking about the infrastructure that we are creating and how that's leading to the interpretations that we're making via our digital historical methods. I'm representing the American Religious Ecologies project, which is a project whose purpose is to create new datasets and new visualizations for studying the history of American religion. Ultimately, the goal is to understand American religious history better, or at least to have a different way of understanding American religious history through the datasets and visualizations that were created. It's a project that is primarily funded by the American National Endowment for the Humanities, and we've been working on this project for just about 1 year. But some of the things that I'm talking about today, the infrastructure that we're building, are not specific just to that project. They are also part of the broader attempts at data analysis and visualization at RRCH&M, and some of the software that we're producing is open source and available for you all to use eventually. Because I'm representing these projects, that also means that the work I'm talking about today is hardly my own work. It's the work of several collaborative teams at RRCH&M. The Religious Ecologies project is co-directed by my colleague John Turner, and DataScribe is directed by my colleague Jessica Otis. We have a number of core collaborators on each of these projects, whose names I've listed here, and we also have a large group of RAs who are listed on the American Religious Ecologies website. I should also say that some of the work that we're doing is work in progress. I'll try to indicate when the work is published and when the work is something that you're getting a sneak preview of. So here's what I will be talking about today. I want to start by asking, why would we create datasets and visualizations for American religious history? Then I'll explain how we've gone about finding primary sources that are suitable for turning into datasets and how we've gone about digitizing them. Just because you have a source digitized doesn't mean you can use it as a dataset, so I'll talk about some of the things that we're doing to transcribe these sources into datasets, and in particular about our DataScribe software that's under development. Once we've got the datasets, we have to analyze them and visualize them, and so I'll talk about the infrastructure that we're building in order to create rich, interactive, scholarly works. And then finally at the end, I'll give you some indication of the theoretical frameworks that we're using for studying American religion, how we think they fit into this use of datasets and visualizations, and the interpretations that we hope to make from the work that we're doing. So what is the current state of using data and visualizations in the study of American religion? American religion is really not a field in which much work has been done with data. Partly this is because of the questions that the scholars in the field are asking. And I'll come back to some of the questions that we're asking and how we think they fit with this use of data and visualizations. But for the most part, scholars are less interested in the data that is created than how religion as a category is created through the process of data gathering. These questions about how states, pollsters, and so forth create the category of religion is an enormously rich literature, but one which I won't have time to get into today. But one of the reasons that scholars have not gotten into data analysis and visualization in the field is because of the relative difficulty of finding data in the first place. The problem is not so much that the sources don't exist. There are many, many sources available. For instance, I'm giving you a few examples here on your screen. You can see up at the top a manuscript volume that was kept by the Paulist Fathers, missionaries who are trying to convert the United States to Catholicism. They wrote page after page about their mission, but at the top of each mission, they also recorded how many confessions and how many converts they heard, where they went, and so forth. So it's possible to make a map or a chart of the success of these missionaries and see them travel across the country on the map. In the lower left, you'll see a book that was published in 1926, an important year for our project, as you'll find out in a moment, that analyzed 100 years of data for the Presbyterian Church in the United States of America. And perhaps the consummate record keepers were the Methodist Episcopal Church. You can see here a yearbook that was published in 1867, recording a great deal of data about many of the individual circuits or churches in that communion. But just because these sources exist doesn't mean that they've been digitized, and if they've been digitized, that does not mean that they are data sets. So there is a lot of potential data out there in the field, but very few actually existing data sets. We're very interested in dealing with these denominational records, but our primary focus right now is on the 1926 census of religious bodies. If you really want to have a kind of a comprehensive approach, or as comprehensive as you are likely to get in the study of American religion, then we have to turn to some of the censuses that the federal government took in the United States. In the US, the federal government first asked questions about religion in the 1850 decennial census, a census whose primary purpose was to count the population. And then, beginning in the year 1906 and ending in the year 1946, the federal government conducted a separate religious body census every 10 years. The 1946 census was never completed. The other 4 decades, however, were, and they were published. You can find the published reports of the Census Bureau quite easily. They're available on Google Books or the HathiTrust, and you can see the tabulated data there. However, in the population censuses in the United States, a lot more can be done with the lower level data rather than the published aggregated data. And the same is true for the 1926 census of religious bodies. Unfortunately, the original schedules exist only for the 1926 census. Some of the censuses were authorized to be destroyed by Congress. Others were not quite sure what happened to them, but it's clear that they no longer exist. However, the 1926 U.S. Census of Religious Bodies is stored in Washington, D.C., just down the road from the Roy Rosenzweig Center for History and Media, and it is as likely to be comprehensive as any data set in American religion could be. The Census Bureau categorized 214 different denominations. This is by no means perfect. They deliberately excluded groups like the Buddhists or other groups like Black Muslims, whom they either had difficulty counting because they didn't fit into their existing notions of what religion would be, or because they regarded them as cults or otherwise not worth counting. But the 214 denominations that they did count represents a very wide swath of American religion, and the Census Bureau was really quite tireless in gathering the data. I've shown you here a schedule or form from the 1926 Census of Religious Bodies. One schedule exists for each congregation in the country in 1926. I've given you a kind of a guide to how to understand what's on the schedule. You can see that they are almost like a primitive database. In addition to the name of the denomination, in this case the Advent Christian Church, you can also see that there's a denomination ID, 000, that was kind of like a primary key for that denomination. This schedule has a ID number on it, 302, which is kind of like a record ID in a database. We know the church's name, we know its location, including down to the populated place. This particular congregation is marked as being rural rather than urban. Its membership is recorded both by sex and by age, and then other details like educational and financial information are recorded as well. As I mentioned, the Census Bureau themselves published reports following their data gathering efforts every 10 years. These reports contain a great number of tables that the Census Bureau thought was worth categorizing on their own. For instance, here to the right, I'm showing you the data that was tabulated by city for each of the different denominations. So here we have East Chicago, Indiana. There were 34 total congregations in that city in 1926, and we can see the membership for each of these denominations. So this data exists at the level of the city or town or populated place, for each city having 25,000 inhabitants or more. This data has not been completely transcribed. It's something that we're working on transcribing. The only data that has really been used from the Census of Religious Bodies is the data that was tabulated at the level of the county. Here I'm including a map from the leading atlas in American religion called the New Historical Atlas of Religion in America. And this map shows you the presence of Congregationalists in 1850. In this case, it's being drawn from the population census rather than the religious body census. Maps like these are extraordinarily valuable because they show the geographic distribution of different denominations across the country. Here you can see the Congregationalists are primarily located in the Northeast and places where migrants from New England later settled. For some denominations, it's even more striking. Some wit once said about the Unitarians that they believed in the fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man, and the neighborhood of Boston. When we use maps like this, we can get a sense of the geographic distribution, but it's very difficult to see a sense of the relationship between different denominations or the ways that they interact with one another in geographic proximity. And part of the reason for that is the county is too high a level of aggregation. We would see a much more rich and detailed picture of American religion if we were able to see down at the level of the populated place or the town or the city. The other reason we would want to create a new data set that is more detailed is so that we can not just look at averages or counts, summary statistics, but rather at the distributions of the data. Take, for instance, these two charts that were published in the 1926 Census of Religious Bodies. On the right, you see the number of male per female members by principal denominations. So in other words, the Latter-day Saints had roughly equal male and female memberships, whereas the Church of Christ Scientist was almost 2-to-1 female rather than male. These charts are good as far as they go because they show us a very striking difference between different denominations in the United States. But then it does raise many different questions. For instance, what was the distribution of male and female membership among the Latter-day Saints or the Presbyterians or the Protestant Episcopal Church? Not every church had exactly the same percentage, and if we were able to see some of the range and variation, then we would have access to the statistical distribution of the number of male and female members. Likewise, for this chart over here on the left, the average Roman Catholic Church might have had 1,800 attendees or members, but not every Roman Catholic Church had the average, and we could see the range from small Roman Catholic churches to big Roman Catholic churches and get a sense of the distribution that was involved there. Not only that, but if we had access to the original data, we would be able to ask these questions not just at the national level, but at the state or the county or even the level of the populated place. So what we are undertaking to do is to digitize the 1926 Census of Religious Bodies in order to have access to the individual schedules, as well as to create a data set from it. Those records are stored in downtown Washington, D.C. at the National Archives and Record Administration building, which you see depicted here. And there are some 230,000 pieces of paper, like those schedules that I showed you earlier, or roughly 314 archival boxes, like the one you see here. So we have our work cut out for us. This set of sources can reasonably be claimed to be the most comprehensive available for the study of American religion, but is one where I've never seen the collection directly cited, and it certainly was not cataloged in any detail until our project started working on it. We have a small group of research assistants who are working on photographing these schedules and turning them into digital images, and from there we are working on turning those digital images into a database that can be accessed by other scholars. As you might imagine, that takes an enormous amount of work, and one of the first steps after photographing the schedules is to catalog and organize them. You can see that we are following the process that the Census Bureau did, in effect reverse engineering their process of figuring out their denomination IDs and their schedule IDs, as well as categorizing each of these schedules by the county in which it was taken so that we're able to search them. In 1926, there was no digital database, but now, thanks to the efforts of our research assistants as well as the developers on our project, we've created a Mecha site which displays each of these images and makes them searchable by place as well as by denomination. Here's a schedule from a Protestant Episcopal Church in San Mateo County, California, and you can see that it has a relationship to the Protestant Episcopal Church. And if we were to go to the Protestant Episcopal Church record, we would be able to find all the other schedules that are associated with it. Likewise, we could go to San Mateo County, California, and see all the schedules of any denomination in that place. So we're enabling users to search and browse the database to do that spatially as well. You can see here, for instance, in Sonoma County, California, that we can find the Advent Christian, Northern Baptist, Seventh-day Adventist, and Protestant Episcopal churches that we have already digitized, with more to come as we make more progress on photographing the schedules. So that's the process of digitizing the schedules. Just because the schedules are digitized and available in the Omeka site, however, does not mean that the data is available for analysis and visualization. In order to do that, we have to extract the information from the page, to note that there are so many members, to note the location of the church, to transcribe its name, and so forth. Now, transcription of data can be done in spreadsheets. I've certainly done a lot of it sitting on the couch watching television myself, and our RAs are temporarily transcribing some of these early schedules that we have photographed in spreadsheets as well. So one of the other projects that we are working on is called DataScribe. DataScribe is a module for the Omeka S platform that aims to make it easier to transcribe structured data, datasets like the one that we're working on for the American Religious Ecologies project. I want to emphasize here in particular that this module is the result of our extraordinarily talented team of designers and developers at the center. Let me see if I can explain why DataScribe is useful. If you understand the distinction in programming languages between strongly typed and dynamic languages, then that's a metaphor that can work for DataScribe. A spreadsheet is like a dynamic language. You can put anything you want into the cell. But just because you can put anything you want into the cell doesn't mean that's the right thing to put there. You could be putting words when you meant to have numbers. And if you put a number, well, perhaps it's supposed to be within a particular range. That means that later on, when you start to do the data analysis, you have to parse the data correctly and validate it. And that never ever works the first time. So DataScribe is a module that's more like a strongly typed language. If you are going to transcribe a date, then you have to transcribe it according to the rules of a date. Or if it's a number, you could validate that it can be a positive number or a whole number. Of course, this is more work to set up than a spreadsheet, but it more than repays the effort by ensuring the reliability and consistency of the data. The other valuable thing that DataScribe is achieving is that it is going to be right next to where people store their primary sources in the Omeka S platform. So here, for instance, you can see one of those records from the Paulist missionary fathers that I mentioned earlier, and you can see that we're transcribing the mission number and some of the start and end dates, as well as the number of confessions that the Paulist fathers heard at that particular mission. DataScribe is itself extensible. One of the problems we have in the American Religious Ecologies project is that we need to transcribe the place names, and not just get the place names, but the latitudes and longitudes that are associated with them. So here you can see an extension to DataScribe, which allows us to select the state and county, and then get a list of the populated places, and in effect, the user is transcribing not the name of the populated place, but a unique GeoID assigned by the federal government to that place, which we can then use to get the latitudes and longitudes. DataScribe is currently alpha software, and it's undergoing extensive testing this summer. When it's available for use, we will of course make a public announcement, but if you wanted to follow development, you could find it at the GitHub link I shared earlier. The goal of the American Religious Ecologies project is to eventually transcribe all of the data from the 1926 Census of Religious Bodies. But in the short term, our goal is to transcribe data from specific denominations, as well as to transcribe all the city-level data for cities above 25,000 people in the 1906, 16, 26, and 36 censuses. Once we've digitized the sources and have transcribed them into a dataset, what are you going to do with the data? We needed to be able to store it in a way that we can use it and query it. While it is possible to do something like that with just CSV files, we needed something that ensured the consistency and reliability as well as the speed of using our data. So our data analysis infrastructure that we've been building at RRCH&M looks something like this. At the lowest level is PostgreSQL and PostGIS. I once sort of joked that a good Hacker News post would be, what is the best database and why is it PostgreSQL? Of course, there are plenty of good databases, but PostgreSQL has particularly strong support for data analysis operations, and the real reason we chose it is that PostGIS, an extension for Postgres, is really unparalleled for spatial data in an open source database. The database stores our data, we're able to query it, and we're able to merge it with the spatial data. This database is able to handle quite a bit more than just our American Religious Ecologies data. For instance, I have several large newspaper corpora from the 19th century United States, all the legal treatises from Anglo-American law in the 19th century, as well as all of the case law in United States history that's publicly accessible in one of these databases. So it's able to handle quite a lot of data. And so then we can use any software that can access a Postgres database to analyze and understand our data. I myself usually use R and RStudio for data analysis and prototyping, but some of the people at the center use QGIS or Python, and of course one can easily ask questions in straight-up SQL. In addition to analyzing the data, we are primarily a web shop, and so what we want to do is get the data to where it is accessible from people's browsers in a compact and quick way. That implies using an API which can speak to both the browser and the database. So we have created an internal API which serves our data as necessary for interactive visualizations. This API could easily have been written in lots of different languages, but we wrote it in Go for performance and stability. The API lets us write whatever queries we need to against the data, and then it serves JSON or GeoJSON as needed. Here's a simple example of output from our Catholic Diocese endpoint, which gives us back the names, dates that they were founded, and latitudes and longitudes for different Roman Catholic dioceses in North America. Now, of course, only a developer could get excited about JSON, so what we really want to do is turn the data from the API into interactive visualizations. We currently have a number of visualizations in progress, including work on the cities data that I mentioned that we are transcribing, a visualization being created by our research assistant Greta Swain on the history of the Presbyterian Church in the United States. But most recently, we have released a map of Catholic dioceses in North America from 1500 to the present. This particular visualization happens to be written in D3, but we may do other visualizations in other JavaScript libraries such as Leaflet. What we are aiming for here is not exactly a straightforward academic project, nor is it digital public history. The term that I think probably best captures what we're after is interactive scholarly work. By that I mean a work which has scholarly content imagined to take advantage of the interactive form of the web and thus accessible to public audiences. The American Religious Ecologies project in particular is working on interactive scholarly works, but this is connected to other things that we are doing at RRCH&M, including another project called America's Public Bible. As we continue to digitize and then transcribe datasets, we'll be adding other interactive scholarly works, like this map of Roman Catholic dioceses that we recently published. Now that we've talked about the infrastructure, we need to circle back around to interpretations. What do we hope to accomplish by creating these interactive scholarly works to explain American religious history? American religious history is not a field with a strong center. That is actually an achievement of the field, which broke free from some unduly Protestant or mainline-centered models in the 1980s, and since has found a flourishing of different approaches to the study of religion, and which has expanded the religious groups it has studied to encompass more of the huge variety of religious practice in the United States. So what we are looking for is not a framework for recentering the field, but a framework for synthesizing the field, a way of seeing American religious history whole. And we think we have found that by talking about American religion in terms of religious ecologies. The idea of a religious ecology can be boiled down to two fundamental questions. How do religious groups interact with one another, and how do they interact with their environment? Here you can see displayed two of my favorite projects in American religious history. On the left we have an image from Wallace Best's book, Passionately Human, No Less Divine, which shows the urban environment surrounding black storefront churches during the Great Migration in Chicago. This is an example of studying religious ecologies by understanding how religious groups fit within their environment. On the right, you can see an example from the Houses of Worship project at the University of Minnesota, which shows how religious groups in Minneapolis and St. Paul, Minnesota, interact with one another. While many, perhaps most interesting questions in American religious history are not susceptible to the kinds of methods that we are using, we think that questions focused around religious ecologies, especially these questions about how religious groups interact with one another in geographic proximity, can be answered through data analysis and visualization. Take this one empirical question, for example. Suppose a person lived in any given town or rural area in America. What was the likelihood that they had access to a meaningful diversity of religious options? Did these options extend to different forms of Christianity? Did it include predominantly black denominations? And did it extend to non-Christian religions? If so, where and to what degree? This empirical question is surprisingly difficult to answer, at least once one extends this inquiry outside of major cities like New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. But as we continue our work on the American Religious Ecologies project, we will be able to answer this question for every place in the United States once we have transcribed the 1926 census to the level of the individual congregation. That's not the only question which can be answered through these methods. We have also started to figure out other ways of examining religious ecologies through denominational statistics that we have gathered. For instance, using the Methodist denominational data, we're able to create charts of Methodist membership by race broken down by conference and district, which were geographically defined. This shows entirely different trends in different parts of the South, giving us a way of approaching questions about religion and race through these methods of data analysis and visualization. So let me end with this metaphorical image. While I couldn't find a suitable image from Luxembourg, this is at least a transatlantic image, since it shows an American symbol, the Statue of Liberty, being assembled in Paris in 1883. So here's the metaphor. This is what our project looks like at this current time. In most academic talks, I would have drawn your attention to the statue, which is to say, the historical interpretations. But given that much of our work on the American Religious Ecologies project over the past year has been building infrastructure, and given that this is an audience of digital humanities builders rather than American religious historians, I've drawn your attention to the scaffolding instead. Digital history practitioners know that infrastructure is essential to building the kinds of interactive scholarly works and other kinds of digital historical work that we want to accomplish. But this work of finding primary sources, transcribing the datasets, and creating the scaffolding isn't the main thing. The historical interpretations that we want to advance are. So as we continue our work on the project, we hope to show you the statue without the scaffolding, but if our scaffolding is at all useful to you, we hope that you will make use of it.